Assalamu alaikum to all the Muslims and greetings to all the non-Muslims. Now, what is the position of Islam in Europe? Where do we go next? Where does it all end? This is probably one of the most hotly debated topics and discussions in recent times. In fact, you'll find many people on YouTube talking about this issue, especially right-wing fascists, neo-Nazis, and racists like Pat Condell and his fans. Now, whenever you get into this discussion, there are 2 points you must make. 2 points you must establish, and 2 points that are a reality and which can't be refuted. Number 1, the Europeans who complain about Sharia law, the Europeans who claim or complain about Islam in Europe, the Europeans who claim that their identities are being stolen and that Muslims are so evil, all these Europeans do is show their ugly, hypocritical faces, and I'll tell you why. These are the very same Europeans whose ancestors went around the world and started colonizing every non-European nation they could find and which was weak enough, including Muslim nations. Europeans went into Africa, they went into the Middle East, they went all the way to the native land in the Americas. It wasn't the United States, the native Indians were living there. Europeans went to all these places, and what did they do? They put all of these people to the sword, and they subjugated them to slavery, and they forced European ways of life upon these people. So when that happens, that wasn't evil, not at all. In fact, if you read history books, you'll never see it being condemned. You'll never see Europeans condemning their violent, bloodthirsty history when they went around colonizing everybody and forcing their way of life upon everybody else. Europeans stole the identity of many of the people they colonized. Not just the Muslims, but the blacks, the Asians, all of them included. But of course, that wasn't a problem. But now, when Islam comes to Europe, now when some Muslims demand Sharia, now it becomes a problem. Now it becomes evil. But when Europeans have been doing this for centuries, it's not evil at all. Nothing. No, it's normal. You see the hypocrisy? Now, and there's another huge difference between the Muslims and the Europeans. You see, folks, Muslim armies are not in Europe forcing Sharia law. Muslims who are calling for Sharia law are doing it through the law, through the court system. They're not actually taking swords and putting it to people's throats and saying Sharia law or death. But on the other hand, when Europe colonized Muslim countries, and the blacks and the Asians, when they colonized these countries, they forced their way of life onto the people through the sword and the guns and their diseases. Muslims are not doing that. There's also another point to note. European imperialism hasn't ended yet. Everyone thinks that Europe has stopped going to other countries and forcing their ways of life. Excuse me? What is Iraq? What is Afghanistan? Europe, especially UK, they've sent their army to force their supposed democratic way of life in Iraq and Afghanistan that has killed thousands of people. But of course, that's not evil at all. And now these same Europeans want to complain that we Muslims are the evil ones. In fact, here's another point. Why are Europeans allowed to freely say, we want democracy and our way of life in the Middle East, we want secularism in the Muslim world? Why are they allowed to say that in the Muslim countries as well? Many European diplomats have gone to Muslim countries saying, we want secularism, we want democracy. Why are they allowed to say that? But when a Muslim says we want Sharia law in Europe, now the Muslim becomes evil. Notice the hypocrisy. Europeans are free. They're free to say we want secularism in the Muslim world, but Muslims aren't free to say we want Sharia law in the European Western world. Why is that? And there's another point. Europeans claim that their identity is being taken away. Our Muslim identity in the Muslim world has been taken away by you Europeans and Westerners. Come to any Muslim country and you'll see that the traditions, the Islamic values, the Muslim traditions are all being wiped away thanks to European and Western advertisement and big corporations. But of course, they have no problem when they do it. When Europe and the West does it, that's okay. But when Muslims do it to them, then it becomes evil. So that's the first point that you have to establish, that Europeans who complain about Sharia law and Islam in Europe, all they're showing is that they're hypocrites, bigots, and that they have a supremacist ideology. They believe that it is okay for them to go into the Muslim world and force their ways on us, but it's not okay for the Muslims to do it in a peaceful way against them. That's the first point that you have to establish, and this point basically means that Europeans are the last to complain. You don't have a right to complain about anything, because your history is coming back to haunt you. What you did to all the other countries is coming back against you. The only difference is that they're not doing it through force. In fact, isn't it ironic that the new face of Europe, that the people who are changing the face of Europe are the blacks, the Asians, and all the ethnic minorities? These are the people who are changing the face of Europe. These are the very same people whose ancestors were enslaved and colonized by the Europeans. So do you see how it's now changing? The very same people the Europeans enslaved are now changing Europe itself. And that my friends, in fact, is a prophecy in the hadiths, which I'll talk about on another day. Now that's the first point you have to establish. Now comes point number 2. You see, there are many Europeans who claim that the only solution will be violence. In fact, you go read many violent comments by Europeans saying, let's kick them all out, let's hurt them, let's throw them in prisons, let's kill them, let's bomb them, let's make a Holocaust against them like we did to the Jews. Now, here's the point. This is to the people who think violence is the solution against the Muslims. Number 1, Muslims, no offense to the Jews, but Muslims are not the Jews. If any European decided to commit a Holocaust against the Muslims would not simply lie down and take it. There would be carnage and chaos. There are millions and millions of Muslims in Europe, and they're not shy to fight back. So if any European ever thought of committing a Holocaust against the Muslims, all hell would break loose and a wide, huge civil war would break out, which nobody would win. Make no mistake, nobody would win, and nothing would happen. You just have dead people. Number 2, times have changed. We live in a globalized world. What happens in Europe affects what happens in the Muslim world. Now this is a fact. There are hundreds of thousands of Europeans, millions, living in the Muslim world. Millions. So to the Europeans, do you think if you commit violence and start committing genocide against Muslims in mass numbers in Europe, do you think Muslims in the Muslim world are just going to sit by and do nothing? No. What's going to happen is that the Europeans living in the Muslim world will themselves be subjugated to killings, beatings, and torture. So what you're going to have is that Muslims living in the European world will be killed, and Europeans living in the Muslim world will be killed as well. And is that a solution? No, that's not a solution. So you see, these people who call for violence show they're very narrow-minded. They don't know how to really plan and strategize. Because I repeat, if Muslims in the Western world start getting killed in mass numbers, then the sad fact is that Europeans themselves will begin to get persecuted in the Muslim world. It will have a chain reaction. So the fact is, violence is not the solution. The way this war is going to be won is through ideology, through the pen and the paper and the lecture. That's how this war is going to be won, and not through the sword. And the fact is, the Muslims are winning the ideological war, not the Europeans. And that, my friends, is a fact. Thank you.